You've been told all your trading life that the stop loss is your savior. That neat little line on your chart, that tiny order hiding below your entry, is supposed to protect you from ruin. Brokers preach it, influencers chant it, and risk managers hold it up as if it were the golden shield of trading. You hear it repeated so many times that it becomes gospel. Always use a stop loss, or you're gambling. Always protect yourself, or you'll blow up. And yet, the uncomfortable truth, the one most traders will never admit out loud, is that stop losses don't save traders. They never have. They never will. If anything, they expose something deeper, that traders don't actually understand risk. They outsource responsibility to a line on a chart. They pray to a protective mechanism instead of designing a risk system. And praying is not structure. Hope is not a trading plan. Let me ask you something raw and unfiltered. How many times have you placed that stop loss exactly where the textbooks or the gurus told you to, only for price to hunt it out like a sniper pulling the trigger? How many times have you seen your stop clipped to the pip, only for the market to reverse in your intended direction and hit the very profit target you had dreamed about? You sit there staring at the screen with your hands half clenched, wondering if the market has a personal vendetta against you. You wonder if your broker is watching your trades and moving the market to clean you out. And in that moment, you swear to yourself, I did everything right. I followed the rules. I protected my risk, and yet I still lost. That's the myth in action. The myth that the stop loss is your savior. The myth that you can place a mechanical line on a chaotic market and call yourself safe. You see, the stop loss has been dressed up as a weapon of discipline. People tell you it keeps your losses small, that it cuts the bleeding before you're drained. And on the surface, it looks logical. After all, if you limit the downside, then you survive to fight another day. But here's the uncomfortable twist. Surviving another day doesn't mean you're surviving as a trader. It means you're surviving as a victim. You live to repeat the same wound tomorrow. You survive to experience the same cycle of being stopped out, chasing another setup, getting clipped again, and wondering why the dream of consistency always feels one arm's length away. Survival without structure is just slow death. Stop losses do not transform you into a risk manager. They expose that you don't have a risk system at all. Think about it. If every trader in the world uses stop losses and yet more than 90% still fail, what does that tell you? It tells you that risk is not in the stop. Risk is in the structure. And most traders have no structure, only lines they hope will hold back the tide. Imagine trying to stop a flood with a paper wall. That's what most traders are doing. The stop is paper, the market is water, and water doesn't care. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not telling you never to use a stop loss. I'm telling you never to worship it. I'm telling you to stop believing it's the savior of your account, because it's not. It's a tool, yes. But tools in the hands of someone without design are useless. Give a hammer to a child and you'll see damage, not construction. Give a stop loss to an unstructured trader and you'll see the exact same thing. Chaos disguised as risk management. What most traders are really doing when they slap a stop on a trade is outsourcing responsibility. They tell themselves, if I lose, at least I managed my risk. No, you didn't. You guessed your risk. You drew a line where it felt comfortable, not where it was structurally intentional. You guessed because you didn't know how to calculate the true relationship between position size, model probability, and account structure. So you hide behind the illusion of safety because illusions are easier to accept than responsibility. And that's why the myth of the stop loss has survived for decades. It gives traders a way to lie to themselves while looking disciplined. Have you ever noticed how the market almost seems to sniff out where you place your stops? Of course it does, because traders are creatures of habit, and institutions know that. They know you've been trained to place your stop just below the last swing low or just above the last swing high. They know you've been told to give it a little breathing room, and so your breathing room becomes their hunting ground. They don't have to see your individual order. They just know that the herd always gathers in predictable places, and the herd always leaves their stops right where the wolves are waiting. So you call it bad luck, but it's not luck. It's design. and your lack of design is what makes you food. Let's take this deeper. If the stop loss were truly the great protector, then wouldn't traders who use them religiously all be consistent? Wouldn't the most disciplined stop users be the ones who rise to the top? And yet, who are the traders that rise? They're not the ones repeating the same cookie-cutter risk rules. They're the ones who design their risk. They know exactly how much of their account is exposed, not just on this trade, but across a series of trades. They know that risk is not one line, it is a structural architecture. They don't hope to survive. They intend to survive. And the difference between hope and intention is night and day. Stop losses don't save traders because traders don't even know what they need saving from. They think they need saving from big losses. Wrong. What they really need saving from is unstructured risk exposure. They need saving from randomness disguised as process. They need saving from themselves, from their tendency to place a line on the chart and call it professionalism, when in reality it's nothing more than protective guessing. And protective guessing is still guessing. Dress it up however you want. It doesn't change the truth. A man putting on a suit doesn't make him a leader. A trader putting on a stop doesn't make him structured. Here's where the myth gets even darker. Because the stop loss doesn't just fail to save you, it actually conditions you to think you've managed risk when you haven't. It lulls you into a false sense of control. It makes you feel responsible without actually being responsible. And that false sense of security is lethal because it blinds you to the real work of risk. Risk is not about drawing a line where you feel comfortable. Risk is about designing a structure that makes comfort irrelevant. Risk is about knowing, before you enter, exactly how much exposure you can carry without jeopardizing the integrity of your account. Risk is about removing the illusion of protection and replacing it with the reality of design. And design doesn't guess. Design calculates. Design measures. Design knows. When you lean on a stop loss as your savior, you are like a man in a storm, holding on to an umbrella and believing it will protect him from the flood. He doesn't realize that the flood is rising not from above, but from below. And when the water hits his chest, the umbrella is useless. That's what happens when traders obsess over stops. They hold up their little umbrellas against the storm of chaos, while the real flood, unstructured exposure, rises beneath their feet, and then they drown, wondering why their umbrella didn't save them. Let's be brutally honest. The real reason traders cling to stop losses is fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing too much, fear of not surviving. And fear always looks for shortcuts. Fear doesn't want to calculate. Fear doesn't want to design. Fear wants an easy answer. So fear clings to the myth, if I have a stop, I'm safe. But fear never builds consistency. Fear only builds survival. And survival without design is just delay. You are not meant to delay death as a trader. You are meant to design life. And life in trading doesn't come from hoping a stop will protect you. It comes from building a structure that makes protection irrelevant. Think about the times you've widened your stop because you didn't want to get clipped. You told yourself, the market just needs more room to breathe. But what you were really saying was, I don't actually know what I'm doing, so I'll give myself more space to be wrong. That's not risk management. That's desperation management. And every time you do it, you reinforce the myth. You teach yourself that the stop is in control, not you. You teach yourself that survival is about avoiding pain, not designing probability. And that is why so many traders remain trapped for years. Circling the same cycle of stops hit, accounts drained, new deposits made, until eventually they quit with the bitter taste of betrayal in their mouths. Betrayal not from the market, but from the myths they chose to believe. Here's the paradox. The very thing you think is saving you is the thing enslaving you. The stop loss doesn't free you from risk. It chains you to fear. It chains you to the illusion that you can survive without design. And until you break that chain, you will never step into intentional trading. You will always be the reactive trader, hoping the market doesn't see you, praying your little paper wall holds back the flood. But floods don't care. Wolves don't care. Chaos doesn't care. And the market doesn't care. It will keep teaching you the same painful lesson until you learn it. Stop losses don't save you. Structure does. And maybe right now you're wondering, If stop losses don't save me, what then? Do I just leave myself open, naked before the market, waiting to be slaughtered? No, that's the false binary you've been conditioned to believe. Either you use stops like everyone else, or you're reckless. Either you hold the umbrella, or you drown. That's what the herd teaches, because the herd doesn't know another way. But here's the truth. There is another way. And before we even touch it, you need to see the lie for what it is. Because until the myth is shattered, until you stop believing that the stop loss is a savior, you won't be ready to replace it with something intentional. Think about how a casino operates. They don't put a stop loss under every single bet that walks through the door. They don't cut off gamblers at the slot machines after 3 pulls to protect their risk. They don't need to. Why? Because their structure is the risk. The house edge is baked into every game, every spin, every card flip. They don't survive because they stop losses. They survive because their structure guarantees long-term probability. You, the trader, must think the same way. But instead of being the casino, you've been playing like the gambler, pulling the lever and hoping your stop will protect you when luck turns sour. That's why you feel drained. That's why you feel like you're always one step behind. And maybe you've even caught yourself saying this. I would have been profitable if my stop didn't get hit. Really? That sentence alone should expose the myth. What you're saying is that your profitability depends not on your structure, but on luck, whether or not the market decided to hunt you out before moving your way. That's not risk management. That's playing hide and seek with chaos. You're hiding behind your little line, praying the market doesn't see you, and when it does, you curse at it like a child who lost a game. Tell me, is that trading? Or is that gambling dressed up with technical analysis? The stop-loss myth thrives because it makes you feel in control. But deep down, you know the control is fake. You know that no line you draw can tame a chaotic market, and yet you keep drawing them because something in you clings to the illusion that if you just get it right this time, if you just give it the perfect breathing room, if you just place it 1 pip lower, then you'll finally be safe. That's like moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. The ship is still sinking, you're just rearranging your hope. Let's get brutally real again. If the stop loss truly worked, brokers wouldn't push it so hard. Think about who benefits. You place your stop, you get clipped, you re-enter, you get clipped again, and every time the broker gets paid. They don't care that you're bleeding out slowly because your stops guarantee more transactions. And the market makers? They love stops. Stops are liquidity. Your protective line is their entry fuel. When you're stopped out, someone else is positioned in. And while you're crying over the trade that almost worked, they're stacking profits because your pain was their price. The myth doesn't just fail you, it feeds the very system that preys on you. And here's the rawest truth. The stop-loss myth survives because traders want easy answers. Nobody wants to sit down and design structure. Nobody wants to do the heavy lifting of calculating exposure across sequences of trades or building models that create probabilistic consistency. They want shortcuts. They want a savior. And the industry happily hands them one. Just use a stop loss and you'll be safe. It's the oldest trick in the book. Give people something simple to cling to and they won't ask deeper questions. But deep questions are exactly what trading demands. And until you ask them, you'll keep bleeding at the altar of the stop loss. Let me show you how this myth eats at your psychology. Every time you're stopped out, you don't just lose money, you lose confidence. You start questioning yourself, your strategy, even your identity as a trader. You begin to internalize the lie that the market is against you, that you're unlucky, that consistency is impossible. And the more this cycle repeats, the more bitter you become. Until one day you either quit or you join the cult of stop adjusters, traders who spend their entire careers tweaking stop distances, chasing the perfect formula that never comes. I've seen traders spend years doing this. Years of moving the line further, tighter, wider, smaller, always adjusting but never transforming. That's not trading. That's chasing shadows. And you know what makes it worse? Every once in a while, the stop seems to work. Every once in a while, it does save you from a bigger loss. And that one moment, that one time, becomes the anchor for the myth. You say to yourself, see, it saved me there. Maybe I just need to refine it. But what you don't see is the long-term truth. That one saving moment is the bait. The dozens of small bleedouts, the endless stop hunts, the constant psychological drain. That's the hook. And you're hooked without even knowing it. Just like the gambler who remembers the one jackpot pull but forgets the hundreds of losses, you cling to the one time the stop saved you, while it quietly bleeds you dry. If you're listening to me right now, I want you to get brutally honest with yourself. How many times has a stop loss actually saved your account from ruin? I don't mean saving you $5 here or $50 there. I mean truly saved you from catastrophe? Be honest. If your answer is rare to none, then why are you still holding on to the myth? Why are you still worshiping a savior that never shows up when it matters most? Isn't it time you asked yourself, what if the real risk rule has nothing to do with stops at all? Here's the reality. Risk is not a line. Risk is a structure. And until you build that structure, you will always be a slave to the myth. You will always be chasing safety instead of creating it. You will always be outsourcing responsibility to a tool that was never meant to carry it. And the more you do that, the longer you remain in the endless cycle of frustration, loss, and false hope. But once you see the myth for what it is, once you expose it, once you tear it down to the root, you free yourself to design something better, something intentional, something that doesn't guess. So let me ask you again. How many more times will you let yourself be stopped out by the myth? How many more times will you accept the role of prey when you were meant to be the hunter? How many more times will you hide behind a paper wall and call it protection? At some point, you must decide. At some point, you must step out of the herd, break the cycle, and admit the uncomfortable truth. Stop losses don't save traders. They never have. They never will. And until you accept that, you will never be free. You've seen now why the stop-loss myth has held you captive. But this is where the shift happens. Because tearing down the myth is not enough. Exposure without replacement leads only to emptiness. If I tell you to abandon the stop-loss as your savior but give you nothing to build in its place, I've left you standing naked in the storm. That's not mentorship, that's cruelty. So here's the pivot. Risk is not protective guessing. Risk is intentional structure. And until you reframe it this way, you will keep circling the same mountain of losses, stops, and false safety. Let's break it down. Guessing is what most traders do. They guess where the market might turn. They guess how much room their trade needs, and they guess how much of their account can handle a hit. Even the so-called professional rule of never risk more than 1% is still guessing. 1% of what? 1% of an account that has no structure? 1% of trades that have no tested probability. 1% of random entries that have no intentional design. 1% of chaos is still chaos. Dressing it up in numbers doesn't make it structured. It just makes the guessing look more official. Structure, on the other hand, is intentional. Structure doesn't ask, where should I place my stop to feel safe? Structure asks, how much of my account can I intentionally expose across a sequence of trades without compromising the integrity of the whole? Structure doesn't ask, how close can I cut this stop so I can maximize my lot size? Structure asks, what is the architecture that allows my model to express itself over time without interruption? Do you see the difference? One approach hides behind numbers that feel professional but are empty of foundation. The other approach builds a foundation that doesn't need to hide. Think of an architect designing a skyscraper. He doesn't guess how much weight the beams can hold. He doesn't just say, let's make them thick enough and hope the wind doesn't topple it. No. He calculates. He designs. He structures every piece so that even if the wind howls and the ground trembles, the building stands. That is intentional structure. And until your trading has that same structural integrity, you're building houses of cards and pretending they're towers. You might ask me, how does a trader actually structure risk? Here's the simplest truth. Risk must be defined not by emotion, not by fear, not by arbitrary numbers, but by the architecture of your account and the probability of your model. That means you don't just calculate risk on one trade, you calculate it across sequences. You don't just focus on surviving one loss, you focus on ensuring 100 losses cannot collapse you. Do you see the difference? That's not guessing. That's design. Protective guessing says I'll risk 1% here, 2% there, let's see what happens. Intentional structure says my account is a machine. Every gear is calibrated. No matter where I enter or exit, the machine never breaks. The machine absorbs impact, distributes weight, and keeps running. And when you start to think like that, you stop panicking when one trade goes wrong. You stop widening stops out of fear. You stop shrinking back after a losing streak, because the structure carries you. The design doesn't break. Risk as structure also changes your psychology. You no longer think in terms of, can I survive this trade? You think in terms of, does this trade fit within my designed ecosystem? You no longer obsess over the pain of one stop out, because one stop out is irrelevant inside a machine built for hundreds. You no longer outsource your discipline to a line on the chart, because your discipline is baked into the structure itself. That's why I tell traders all the time, behavior follows structure. If your risk is structured, your behavior aligns. If your risk is guessed, your behavior collapses under pressure. Imagine your account as a fortress. Protective guessing is like patching holes in the wall every time an arrow flies your way. Intentional structure is like building the fortress so no arrow can breach it in the first place. The market can shoot as many arrows as it wants, but the walls don't fall because they were designed to withstand it. That's risk as structure. That's what stops being a trader who hopes to survive and becomes a trader who intends to thrive. And I need you to hear this. Intentional structure doesn't mean you never lose. It doesn't mean your trades are magically protected from drawdown. Loss is part of the system, but structure reframes it. When you lose inside a structure, it doesn't feel like chaos. It feels like sequence. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like part of the design. That's the shift. Losses no longer shake you because the machine was built to carry them. You don't need to guess whether you can handle it. You know you can because you designed it that way. This is why protective guessing fails. Every time you guess, you tie your emotional stability to the outcome of a single trade. If the trade wins, you feel smart. If the trade loses, you feel crushed, and your identity as a trader swings back and forth like a puppet on strings. But when your risk is structured, no single trade has the power to define you. Your identity is anchored in the structure, not in the outcome. And that is freedom. Let me get very direct here. If you are still treating risk as a stop-loss placement exercise, you are not trading. You are hoping. You are not an intentional trader. You are a protective guesser. And protective guessers always fail because the market exposes guessers. But intentional traders, they build structures so solid that even the chaos of the market cannot crack them. They stop asking, what if I lose here? And start asking, does this align with my design? That's the only risk rule you'll ever need. Structure over guessing. Design over hope. Intention over fear. I want you to pause for a second and imagine your trading account as a machine you engineered yourself. Every gear, every lever, every bolt is placed exactly where it needs to be. You know how much stress each piece can handle. You know what happens if one gear slips. You know how the weight is distributed. And no matter how hard the market pushes against it, your machine doesn't collapse because you didn't guess. You designed. That's what risk must feel like. Not fear, not hope, not panic, but trust. Trust in your design, trust in your structure, trust in the machine you built. That's why I tell traders, the only risk rule you'll ever need is not always use a stop. It's not never risk more than 1%. It's not some magic ratio or guru formula. The only risk rule you'll ever need is this. Build risk as intentional structure, never as protective guessing. Once you internalize that, once you build that, you don't need to worship stop losses anymore. You don't need to cling to myths. You walk into the market knowing that you are not hoping to survive. You are structured to thrive. And that is where consistency begins. So I'll leave you with this question. Are you still guessing, or are you ready to build? Because your answer will decide your fate as a trader. Not the market, not your broker, not your stop loss. You, your choice, your structure, your intention. That is the only risk rule you'll ever need. And if this conversation has hit you deeper than just another trading tip, then you already know you don't belong with the herd. You're not here to keep following recycled advice. You're here because you're ready to break myths, and build structure. That's why I created this space, Trading Rebels. This is where we dismantle illusions, expose the traps that 90% of traders die in, and build intentionality from the ground up. If you're tired of bleeding behind protective guessing and ready to step into design, then you're in the right place. So here's what I want you to do. Subscribe now, not because it's the YouTube thing to say, but because you need to anchor yourself in a community that refuses to play the same old game. Hit that like button if this message shook something inside you, because when you engage, you tell the algorithm, show this truth to more traders who are ready to wake up. And drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me how this hit you. Tell me the battles you've had with stop-loss myths. Tell me what you're ready to unlearn. This is not just a channel. This is a rebellion. And your voice matters here. Stay tuned, because the next episode will go even deeper into tearing down what you thought was trading and replacing it with what actually builds consistency. Remember this, rebels don't wait for permission. They design their own path. And here at Trading Rebels, we design it together.